Hi there folks, back again for another video. In this one, we're going to be talking about fantasy fellowships. One of the nice things in the Quest for the Ringbearer book, which you can get from Games Workshop, is that it contains every single encounter that you would want to play out on the tabletop for Frodo and the rest of the Fellowship as they were going through their adventures, starting off in the Shire all the way through to Mount Doom. There's some really awesome scenarios in there, and it's possibly one of the coolest things to pick up if you're like a full-on narrative player and you really want to dive into that side of the Middle-earth strategy battle game. It's really good fun. Comes with a whole host of fun scenarios in there. Some of them aren't actually done with miniatures. Some of them are a little bit quirky and weird, which is always nice as well. But it just allows you to dive in and tell the story from the books and the movies and everything in between. But in addition to the rules for playing with the actual Fellowship, so, you know, Aragorn, Gandalf, Legolas, Boromir, Gimli, Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin, there's also a section in the back of the book which is dedicated to starting a fantasy fellowship. So I've come up with a couple of ideas. We'll go through those in a little bit, but I just wanted to kind of break down how the fantasy fellowship works, if I can bring all those F's together. So this is kind of their core rules. You don't necessarily have to abide by this. You could always go off and do something entirely different if you really wanted to. So you start with your Ringbearer. So your Ringbearer can be Frodo Baggins from the Fellowship Army List, Bilbo Baggins from Thorin's Company, Bilbo Baggins from the Shire, or Smeagol from the Fellowship Army List. Then you need to choose a companion. So the companion is a loyal friend. So it can be any Hobbit hero that it currently exists within the rules, as long as it's not one of the ones that came back during the Scouring of the Shire and that kind of thing. If you go with Bilbo, then as in younger Bilbo, then you can go for a member of Thorin's Company who is worth 60 points or less, which is kind of good. Then you've got the rest of the Fellowship, so this one's a little bit fun to dive into. So you can play around with replacing Merry and Pippin, as a lot of people, they weren't necessarily meant to be going on the quest anyway, but they come with you if you're playing the normal, if you're following the normal Fellowship, I suppose. But they can be any heroes that are 50 points or below. And they can have war gear and everything as well attached to them, which is quite nice. And then you've also got a couple of different options for spellcasters. So you could have Gandalf the Grey, but you could go down the route of having Saruman the White, Radagast the Brown, Galadriel, Elrond, Celeborn, Círdan, Arwen, Gildor in Glorium would be a nice one, Thranduil, King of the Woodland Realms, if you wanted to tie it into the kind of the way that you take things for the Hobbit and that kind of playing around with that era. You've also got Saruman the White, who can be chosen because maybe he didn't fall to evil, and that allows you to take Grima as part of your Fellowship if you like. The rest of the Fellowship are essentially made up of all manner of different characters, depending on what you want and the theme that you want to go for. But as it stresses in the rules, one of the things about this is that whoever you replace is going to take part in those particular scenarios that are represented in the book. So whoever replaces Boromir will be the one who dies. Aragorn will be the one. Aragorn could be replaced with whoever, and they will be the one fighting at the Black Gate and at Minas Tirith and at and leading at Helm's Deep and all that kind of stuff. Same thing goes for the replacements that you choose for Legolas and Gimli as well. In addition to that, you've got a couple of additional rules in here. So all your heroes must be from the good side, no evil models. Your Fellowship cannot exceed more than 750 points. There's other additional ones. So if you're choosing a pairing, so if you have Elladan and Elrihir or Murrin and Dra, they take up 2 slots in your Fellowship. They all must have the infantry keyword. The rule of 1 still applies. And there's some other bits and pieces in there as well, which is quite nice. But most importantly, one of the things that they throw in is that if you're trying to kind of build this, think about how you'd thematically build this to a particular time period within Middle-earth. So you're going to be going for the Third Age more often than not. I mean, obviously, especially with the rules that we have here and the miniatures that we have here. But try and tie it to who would be around during Bilbo's era when he was younger, or who would have been around at significant points throughout the process of the ring being taken to Mount Doom and all that kind of stuff. All the ring being found by Deagle and then taken by Smeagol, and all that kind of good stuff. And you can play around with some interesting things there, which is quite nice. It should also be noticed that you can't take Tom Bombadil, Goldberry, Gandalf the White, or Galadriel, Lady of Light, because they're a little bit powerful, aren't they? So I've got a couple of fellowships, I guess you'd call them warbands, that I think would be really fun to use. The first of these abides by these rules, as far as I remember. They may be slightly different, but abides by these rules. The second one of them is a little bit more of a kind of what if, not very legit, but could be fun for you to kind of play around with. So the first one of these is very much based around the idea of when Bilbo had claimed the ring, and maybe he'd spent a couple of years in the Shire when he'd returned from his adventures in the mountains with the dwarves, and Gandalf maybe had worked out earlier on that the ring belonged to Sauron and it was the One Ring. At that point, in my kind of headcanon for this, Gandalf goes off. He joins up with the rest of the White Council, -1, as we'll get to in a second, and they are trying to work behind the scenes to displace the necromancer Sauron from Dol Guldur. But at the same time, he makes sure that Bilbo is on his way with some of his best friends to try and get to Rivendell and try and secure the ring in a place of power, and failing that, taking it onwards to Mount Doom to destroy it before Sauron can return to Mordor and use it to kind of regain more of his form and his power and his will to dominate all men. So we have Bilbo Baggins leading the way from Thorin's company here. I'd run him with the stuff that he would have found had he come back from Erebor. So we have him with Sting, obviously, so you can run around with that, which is quite nice, and have him kicking ass and taking names. Alongside him then, and this is something that's very much inspired by the One Ring role-playing game, there's also lots of tales of Balin coming to visit Bilbo during his time before he goes off to Moria. In this version of the story in the Legendarium, I have this idea that Balin is convinced not to go to Moria and instead follows Bilbo as kind of like one of his buddies with him on his journey, as almost like a thank you for what he was able to do with Erebor and helping with the company there. And he just sort of sticks with his Hobbit buddy steadfastly and is going to be fighting alongside him as he leaves the Shire. He's also incredibly sort of, I guess you'd say, world-weary, which means that he's seen a lot. And so having him on your side is probably a good way to take things, I reckon. And so it would be nice to have Balin on side, I reckon, as he goes off on a new adventure. Alongside him then, I thought if we're running with the idea of dwarves, maybe some more of the dwarves that potentially would have gone off on this journey with Bilbo should be sort of roped in. So we have Oin, for example. So Oin was the one of the dwarves that eventually went with Balin to Moria on the doomed expedition, but I thought he'd be a really fun one to include in because he feels like he'd fit into that theme of sort of adventuring and wanting to sort of be on the side of everybody else, sticking with them through thick and thin and all that kind of stuff, and probably would have been taken on by Balin to help with some of the extra work. And he's quite a nice little profile as well. He comes with the healing herbs, which is quite nice as well, and then he's also got the prognostication, which allows people to do some re-rolls, which is quite nice too. And it's got a fun little model at the same time. Now, a lot of people would maybe think, oh, well, you're going to go with Norien for the other one because that kind of matches up with who went on the expedition. But I really like the friendship and the fellowship that's brought out in the movies between Bofur and Bilbo. And I thought the model's really great as well. And so having Bofur alongside them, I thought would be quite a nice little addition, so that he can sort of help with all of the heavy lifting and all the extra work. And maybe it was one of those things where Bilbo is at his home in Bag End, and Balin's turned up to sort of spend some time with him. Gandalf comes back with news of the One Ring and what it is and what it can do, and Balin had got Owen and Bofa with him at the same time, and they sort of joined together to help Bilbo get out of the Shire, and that just means that they all sort of get dragged alongside this wonderful mission with the plucky little hobbit. Now here's where things go a little bit different. So in terms of replacing Gandalf, I was thinking of going down the route of Saruman wouldn't have been corrupted potentially, so maybe you could run with him. But then I also thought Elrond would be a really cool way to take this, and it'll sort of blend into some of the other characters later on as well. So with Elrond being a ring bearer, I thought it'd be interesting that he's worried about the awakening of the rings of power as well, and so he goes with Bilbo as sort of like a, I'm going to fight with you to the bitter end kind of thing. I was there at Mount Doom when, you know, Isildur failed to throw it into the fires, and so I've decided that I'm going to go with you this time, and I'm going to help you on your journey. And he's very fond of Bilbo as well, as we see later on in the books and stuff, where he lets Bilbo stay at Rivendell and things. So having him by the side of Bilbo just seemed like it made sense, I think. And it sort of meant that the rest of the White Council could go off and do their thing, and Elrond would stay behind to look after Bilbo and his kin. Especially with all the dwarves there as well. Maybe he's a little bit worried about them. We'll get to that in a second as well. The other elven attachment to this little warband comes in the form of Elladan and Elrohir. I love the models anyway, and I think they're a fantastic little pairing for using the game. But also, Elrond had said that he would have potentially found elven warriors from his own kin to go on the quest with them. And I always kind of think that maybe that would have been Glorfindel, but we'll get to that in a bit anyway. But I thought Elladan and Elrohir maybe would have tried to say, we want to prove ourselves, so we'll go with you on this journey, Father. And so they're like, we're going to come with you and travel deeper into the lands of the enemy and try and get to Mount Doom and help out and sort of prove themselves at the same time. Not that they necessarily need to, really, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, they lead a fairly impressive journey with Aragorn in the books and things, as they sort of cut their way through the south and the paths of the dead and stuff. And so having them on side would be quite a nice little addition. And I just love the models, so it's nice to have them there. And I don't think Elladan and Elrohir get enough love. Now here's where we change things up. I'll come to Glowing at the end, actually. But Bard was another one that I thought would be really fun. So obviously, you know, Bard's off in Esgaroth and Dale and stuff, trying to make sure that everything's hunky-dory over there. But maybe he hears of this quest that Bilbo is undertaking, and so he decides, I'm going to go and visit Elrond and find out what's going on. When he's there with Elrond and everybody else, he realises that Bilbo's quest is a fated one and could potentially lead to ruin for everybody involved. And so he decides to come and join in alongside Bilbo and the rest of the dwarves. And, you know, all these folks from Erebor who they've worked together with over the last couple of years to kind of like cement the relationship between the men of Esgaroth and Dale and stuff and the mountains once again. And so having Bard on side would be a really fun little addition, I think. And he kind of has that kind of Aragorn swagger to him as well, and so I think it would be really fun to see this kind of man of the North coming down to fight alongside the rest of Middle-earth in order to try and save it from the lingering threat of Sauron. Last but not least, for this fellowship, we have Glóin, and the thing that's interesting about this one is he's my replacement for Boromir. I don't necessarily think that he would be tempted by the ring, but I do think of him as kind of like a sort of an odd one within the bunch. Potentially, it could be quite an interesting one. So obviously, he came to the Council of Elrond when he'd heard word of what was happening with Sauron and everything like that, and Gimli eventually goes off with the Fellowship in the actual story. But this is me thinking, maybe back at this point, Glóin's like, how are we going to deal with this? I'll go with my friends because Balin seems to trust Bilbo in order to fulfill this great quest, and maybe he gets a little bit jaded further along the way and isn't necessarily tempted by the ring, but maybe finds himself in a situation where he doesn't start to believe that the Fellowship can do what it needs to do, and so that's when he sort of dies defending his allies and his friends, protecting Oin and Bofa from the clutches of the Uruk-hai, and at Amon Hen, in sort of like a last-ditch attempt to kind of prove himself. And so I thought that would be a really fun little kind of fantasy fellowship, which, as far as I'm aware, matches with all the maths. So it's 745 points in total, I think, which is kind of cool. So you could dive in and play around with that and have some fun, obviously, which is quite nice. I really like the mix of elves and dwarves in here. I think that's really sort of fitting for the Hobbit era, and I could really see Elrond being the one who kind of like instigates this and is like, right, we're going to go off and do this. Gandalf, I need you to go off with Saruman and Galadriel and all the others to try and like deal with the necromancer in Dol Guldur. We're going to try and do the rest of this quest. We're going to make sure that we can, put an end to this and get rid of the ring before things get too deadly. And just having Bard in there as well, I think would be really fun. So yeah, a nice little collection of stuff that I think was quite thematic, but also kind of worked well together, had some interesting special rules to play around with, dealt with the narrative quite nicely, and told a little bit of an interesting story that sort of took things in a different direction. So then I have a second fantasy fellowship, and this is a little bit more of a what if. So this one brings things forward to the time of Frodo and everything like that. But in this version of the kind of storyline that I'm going with, Smeagol is captured by Aragorn, as happens in the books, but he doesn't escape from the dungeons of Mirkwood, and he is taken to Rivendell, where Bilbo, where older Bilbo is then bought later on down the line, as he sort of travels off to sort of get the ring to a safe place. And so that's when they meet as this kind of unlikely pairing. Now, in this kind of storyline that I'm going with, Elrond sends Elladan and Elrohir, who replace, and this doesn't make sense at any of the points, so it wouldn't work in terms of the actual rules, but he sends Elladan and Elrohir, who were fighting or searching for Aragorn, to go and find Bilbo and make sure he gets to the Shire okay. And so they get sent to the Shire. They pick up Bilbo, who is an older version of himself, but, still pretty awesome. Nice to see him out and about, obviously. He's still quite spry, as long as he's got the ring with him, I guess. So they go and find Bilbo, who is making his way to sort of Crick Hollow and all that kind of stuff. They eventually meet. They eventually get to on the way from the Shire, as if they're heading to Rivendell. They obviously would meet Smeagol, who trying to protect the ring, but also not fully on board with everything, I guess. He is kind of like a erstwhile friend and companion to Bilbo, and they kind of form this bond where they're like, Smeagol, you're going to lead me to Mount Doom, you know where it is, you can take us there, kind of thing. And so they kind of form this unlikely friendship. When they get to Rivendell, Saruman has not fallen to the whims of Sauron and looking for power, and so he has decided, right, I can't let Gandalf deal with this. Gandalf, go off and do your thing. Make sure you sort of rouse the peoples of Middle-earth to fight on the side of good. Aragorn, you're going to go down south. Forget dealing with the ring. You are going to go and make sure that Minas Tirith is fully guarded, and, Rohan and everything is all fine. Although, of course, Rohan would be fine, actually, in this scenario, because it wouldn't have been tempted and twisted quite so much by Saruman. But anyway, you go down and reinforce the south and make sure that the people of Minas Tirith are ready for the invasion. And then we tie in some of the other interesting characters and stuff like that. So the rest of the Fellowship that is then sort of brought together, Glorfindel is like, right, I'm not letting anybody else deal with this. I'm going to go and help sort out this problem. So Glorfindel is sort of draws his sword and is like, we're heading to Mordor. I will get you there. I've defeated Balrogs. I've done all sorts of deadly stuff. I can deal with this. So Glorfindel is off leading the charge for the rest of the Fellowship. He's then joined by Faramir, who, after receiving the vision down in Minas Tirith, he's the one who gets sent up to Rivendell to answer the call of Elrond and join the council. And so having someone who's slightly more measured on side is the one who comes with everybody and sort of goes off on the quest. So in this kind of mashup of stuff, Elladan and Elrohir have replaced Merry and Pippin. Bilbo is obviously the replacement for Frodo. Gollum is the replacement for Sam. Saruman's the replacement for Gandalf. Glorfindel takes the kind of Aragorn role. Faramir's the Legolas, I suppose. And then we have 2 additional ones. So another pairing that I've really liked in terms of miniatures in the game, and I just love the models, are Murin and Dra. Now, they're not particularly tied into anything necessarily in terms of the lore and the background of Middle-earth, but I love the idea of these wandering dwarves. And in my head, they find themselves almost captured, I guess, as they're sort of trying to sort of wander around the Troll Shores and find themselves in maybe the dungeons of Rivendell, or they've been sort of kept as prisoners because they've maybe wandered a little bit closer than they should have done. And so Murin and Dra, kind of thinking that they could sort of get out of this situation and follow the rest of the Fellowship, decide to band together with the rest of them, and they're the ones that sort of head out on the adventure with the rest of the Fellowship, which I thought would be kind of nice. But yeah, I quite like the idea of then, because obviously this means that one of them is a Gimli and one of them's the Boromir, and I love the idea of maybe one of them falling to defend the other one in that kind of Amon Hen style scenario. Maybe you sort of twin it with their info and their lore that you've got on the in the entry. So, for example, the rash and daring Murin has developed great skill with his sword Kalazal. So maybe he's the one who is kind of the Boromir of that. And then you've got the slightly more calm and collected Dra, who is the one who, with his bow, of course, is the one who is left behind, obviously, maybe of the 2. I thought that'd be quite cool, because then you'd have this kind of sadness going on where you'd have this lone dwarf rather than both of them. I think it'd be really nice then, because that changes up the 3 hunters thing. You've then got Glorfindel leading the way alongside Faramir and Dra, which I thought would be quite cool, sort of running across the lands. Obviously, none of this works in terms of the actual points that you need to pay to make this into an actual Fellowship. I think it's way above the cap. But I thought that would just be a really fun sort of alternative way of telling the story and going down an interesting sort of what if. A lot of people will do the thing where they replace Gandalf with Saruman and stuff like that, which I think is quite nice, and play around with the Bilbo idea. But I just thought it'd be a fun way to kind of play around with a whole bunch of characters that in no real way match up to what we've already got, or kind of link themselves into that Bilbo time frame, and instead look slightly more towards the Lord of the Rings and that sort of ending of the Third Age and stuff, which I thought was quite nice. But yeah, a couple of fantasy fellowships there that I think would be fun to run at the tabletop. I would really love to get this one together and run it. I have all of the models for this. I have Elladan and Elrohir. I have Elrond. I don't have a Bard, but I do have the rest of these models. I do have all of this fellowship, which would be quite fun to run. But again, I think it might be a little bit OP, especially with the likes of Glorfindel in there, and Saruman, and Murin and Dra, and Elladan and Elrohir and stuff like that. At least Faramir is basically cool, I suppose. But yeah, just a couple of cool fantasy fellowships that I thought would be well worth having a look at potentially putting together to play some games with. It would be really fun to hear in the comments down below what you think of these. Do you like my kind of Bilbo, my young Bilbo version? Do you like my very, very much what if version and the way that story's been told? Let me know down in the comments below. And also, tell me what your fantasy fellowship would be, either following the rules that are laid out in Quest for the Ringbearer, Or maybe if you just want to sort of go ham and come up with some interesting stories that you'd love to see told with the miniatures that would be making up your Fantasy Fellowship. Like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff. There's also a Ko-fi link down below, so if you like what I do, you can send a couple of quid my way and I can buy some coffees and teas and keep myself going as I dive into a little bit of hobby. But you don't have to do that. The most important thing is just getting involved in the comments and sharing your thoughts, because I absolutely love hearing what you have to say. I shall also say as well, the contest is still going. The little comment to win contest is going. So if you want to get your hands on a copy of Tom Bombadil, the old lovely metal miniature, then you can do so. All you got to do is head over to the community tab, find the picture of the miniature, drop a comment in there following all of the rules, and once we hit 2,000 subscribers, we will eventually do it. Somebody's going to be picked at random from that, and they will win that lovely Tom Bombadil, and I will send it anywhere and all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, awesome. Tell me about your fantasy fellowships. Who would they be made up of? What era would you be playing in? And what else would you be doing with it? Maybe you could tell an interesting fantasy fellowship that went as far back as the time of Isildur. Maybe he realizes that the ring is taking more control of him than he thought, and so you could play around with that time period in particular. That could be very, very cool, and it would be very much a kind of Numenorian Elven alliance. I think maybe I should come back and do something a little about that. But yeah, I'm going to move on and get ready to do another video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.